Hi, podcast listeners. Thanks so much for coming to visit my eco-friendly home today. I'm your host, Madison Hopkins, and I'm so delighted to have you. When you're a guest in my eco-friendly home, I want you to walk away with tangible steps to reduce your home's emissions, live healthier, cleaner, save money, and of course, build community. So come on in and make yourself right at home. Oh, goody, you brought those low-sugar cookies I love, my favorite. Welcome into my eco-friendly home today, y'all. It is the first episode of 2021. So I'm time stamping this episode because welcome into the new year, and why the heck not? So if you're watching this video anywhere, you're probably going to notice I'm in my bedroom. This is not something I ever thought that I would do, but podcasters will frequently record in their closets, just anywhere there's a lot of fabric and cushion, because it really helps keep the sound really muted. And I would absolutely love y'all to have a great quality audio episode right now. So this episode is going to be slightly different because I do not have a guest here, and I am reading once again off of my Word document that I created to give y'all all the facts and figures that I found about, drumroll please, recycling. The truths, the lies, the pros, and the cons. That's what we're discussing today. Information from this episode came from a multitude of sources, including EcoCycle's webinar, Front Range Recycling 101. EcoCycle is based in Boulder, Colorado. The Plastic Wars documentary on PBS with the host Laura Sullivan. That is a really good documentary, and it's free to watch online. I would definitely recommend checking that out, Plastic Wars. And information also comes from my very own investigative interview with Mark Industries Recycling Center in my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana. So let me tell y'all a little story. In the summer of 2018, I was fresh out of college with a major in anthropological studies. I had moved back to my parents' house in Monroe, Louisiana, and was mildly unsure what to do with myself, but saw there were many places I could interject myself to make a social change. So I started with what I knew: recycling. In college, I'd grown accustomed to the curbside recycling programs, and it bothered me that this priority of mine was not an option in Monroe. So I was more than willing to take the extra steps to collect my household's recycling and drive it to the community collection site. Each week I did this, and I was seeing the massive amounts of recycling collected at the site and was getting to know the workers on a first-name basis. I started to wonder where it all went. How long did it sit in this location before it actually what? Got recycled, I hope. But was it sent somewhere? What actually happened to all this plastic, aluminum, paper products? Did it even leave here? I had a bunch of questions, so one of the employees I was getting to know, Chris, was kind enough to answer these questions for me and show me around one day. Chris informed me that bringing recycling to this site was step 1, collection. Step 2 was sorting everything into its appropriate categories based on different types of plastics and sorting the aluminum and paper products out too. Step 3 was where my knowledge stopped. Step 3 was selling each group of recyclables to a purchaser, usually in Indonesia or Malaysia, and what they did with it after that, he could not get very specific with me since that's not his territory of expertise. But the intention is that the third-party purchaser overseas would turn it into raw materials, then sell those raw materials to a company who would do something and make another product out of them. Typically, that purchaser, the end purchaser, was China. So according to the popular documentary produced by NPR, Plastic Wars, the amount of recycled material that actually gets recycled is only a mere 10%. Let me rephrase that. Of all the plastics in the world, of the amount that actually reaches a recycling bin, only 10% of that gets turned into something else. In the film, there's a recyclables convention going on. A sales representative for a popular toothpaste brand with millennials holds up a tube and says, "The system is not able to recycle this tube yet." She points to the 3 tracing arrow symbols on the tube and says, "But it's technically recyclable." Therefore, they got to market it as such. There's only certain types of plastics that can be recycled easily, and I will touch on those in just a bit. But first, I want to uncover the mystery of the ones that are not so easy to recycle and causing a lot of problems, such as that toothpaste container in the 20% of the content that is not supposed to be there, that creates 80% of the problems in the quality control for end markets. So that's the second time I've said that word, end markets. Remember, that was China. The mixed plastics that cause 80% of these problems include plastic bags, like the kind that you get at the grocery store, or the kind that you also get at the grocery store and put your vegetables in. They will get stuck in the sorting machines and will shut the whole recycling plant down for like a whole day, which causes loss in money, loss in time. Other things that are a really big problem are chip bags, because they're a mix of plastic and aluminum. As you know, they look like plastic on the outside. When you open them up, they look like aluminum. They're a mix of things, so they're not recyclable, they're just trash. And another problem is clamshell containers. Clamshell containers are the ones that hold berries, that you eat salads out of, those sorts of things. They open and close like a clam. So, according to Millennium Recycling, and that's millenniumrecycling.com, clamshell containers are made of number 1 PET thermoform and are used for berry containers, salad containers, tomato containers, and fresh herb containers. So to quote them from their website, "There are no good American markets that want this material. This is a perfect example of why we don't sort by plastic numbers. A number 1 clamshell container isn't the same as a number 1 bottle, and they can't be recycled the same way either. Clamshells create significant contamination problems if they make it in with other plastics, and as they must be heated at a different temperature and recycled separately. They actually cause ash when they're melted, and they can ruin an entire batch of new product." So you might have heard people say before, talk about contamination of recycling. And I always thought that it meant like food, which it does, but I did not realize that it also included different kinds of plastics melting at different temperatures and contaminating each other that way. So lastly, Millennium Recycling said, "Some companies burn these types of plastics for energy, but as a consumer, the easiest option for you is to try to avoid buying them in the first place. Put them in your trash bin or try to reuse it." So I would actually switch those a little bit, because the first thing they say is avoid buying them, then throw it away or try and reuse it. Of course, I would like to take a moment to say the first thing you should do is exactly refuse. Refuse to buy it. And these are part of the 5 R's of recycling. We're all very used to reduce, reuse, recycle, but we have refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, and then recycle. So a lot of people will reuse, and this would be the second one that I would say, and then the third one would be throw it away. But a lot of people talk about reusing things, like I'm going to take this salad container and put another salad in it. That's fantastic. That's using the same product multiple times for what it's designed for. But then maybe, you collect a lot of salad containers and you're like, I can't keep using all of these salad containers. So my roommate right now, Desi, actually repurposes a lot of things to make arts and crafts out of, which I know is really fun for her. She takes like glass bottle tops off of bubbly waters and makes like earrings out of them or necklaces, and she made me a fun keychain. So that's an example of repurposing. And in my next episode, which you're going to have to wait to find out what it is, but I have a call to action for artists to reuse and repurpose mascara wands. So we'll come back to that later, little teaser for you. But yeah, think about how instead of just reusing something as a salad container, how you can repurpose it. And then the last thing to do with those clamshell containers is to throw them away because they're not recyclable, which makes me think that I want to do a berry boycott in my future. You will notice on some containers also that they are compostable, which is great. So instead of throwing it in the trash, you can throw things in the compost. Just ask your compost collector. Maybe you're doing a home compost, but wherever you're sending your compost, you want to make sure that they do accept compostable plastics and cups and things like that, because not all of them do. And that's another major message in this podcast too, is ask your recycling centers, your recycling collectors, whatever it is, what can and can go not. Oops, can go not. What can and cannot go in your recycling bin. Okay? So, as you might have heard, as did I, that in 2018, China stopped importing the world's recycling. I also heard that that left Americans with no way to process our recycling, but after doing some research, I learned this is not entirely true, and I've heard mixed messages from different people, which is why I'm bringing this topic into it, because I heard that we didn't have a way to process our recycling anymore, and that kind of screwed us over, but I heard on EcoCycle's webinar recently that this actually wasn't the case. So let's take a look at what happened. In the 1980s, 40 years ago, China started making a very slight profit on purchasing cheap, unwanted, unprofitable plastics, such as those mentioned above, like the clamshells, and turning raw materials into exportable goods. According to Waste Management on EcoCycle's webinar, China was the world's largest end market in the recycling process. It's a resource-poor country, and since they didn't have the infrastructure to build their own recycling facility, this started out as a win-win, taking in unwanted plastics, turning them into raw materials, and exporting those as goods. Over time, the economic growth ceased, though, as illegal dumping and burning of the plastic waste began to run rampant in the rural areas of these Chinese lands. The government was now spending more money than they were making from recycling to clean up toxic messes in their ecosystem, as well as put money into the healthcare system to tend to its citizens who were suffering from the effects of burning plastic waste. In 2008, China hosted the Olympics and received a lot of scrutiny for its mess, so they began to clean up their image and put policies in place. Some policies that the representative for waste management mentioned in this webinar were Operation Green Funds in 2013, Green National Sword in 2017, and Blue Sky in 2018. So I didn't look up what those were. There's the names. If you want them, you can go do your research, DM me on Instagram, and I would absolutely love to get into that with you, and I'll look them up myself if you want to start that for us. In 2017, China banned 24 different mixed plastics and mixed paper materials being imported. So this is where we really start to see the effects of their illegal dumping. They started losing money. So in 2017, they had to ban these 24 mixed plastics and mixed papers. They also changed the contamination limit from what was 1 to 5% contamination to 0.5% of contamination. It turned out that 25% of America's recyclables did not meet the new requirements of 0.5% of contamination levels, resulting in the United States, the world's single largest plastic producer, losing its end market within a 6-month notice. Okay, let's reiterate that. 25% of America's recyclables did not meet that 0.5% of contamination levels. So this meant that we now had to address our own recycling problems. In order to address the problem, we have to, 1, increase education on what items can and cannot be recycled, which will reduce our contamination levels. Also, we have to increase education on how to properly recycle. For example, you have to wash out the remaining food waste that is in your plastic container. You don't have to flush it into the sink, but you have to at least get most of it out, put it in a compost or the trash, preferably the compost, and then wash that out. And that's how you recycle. And the second thing we have to do is increase or build out our local end markets, which brings me back to the materials that can be recycled. Promised that we would come back to that. So, common items that can go into a single stream recycling bin. Now, take a listen, people. This is important points here. They're just 4 little points. 1, common items that can go into a recycling bin are bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard. Bottles include glass. Bottles include glass, like a Coke bottle. Cans include aluminum and steel that are food grade, like a Coke can or a green bean can. Plastic bottles include, and this is the little jingle they always say, tubs, jugs, and jars. So these are the shapes to remember: plastic bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. And I totally meant to look that up before this podcast of what examples of tubs and jugs are. I think that includes things like dishwashing or laundry washing detergent, but I will have to report back. Paper and cardboard, okay? Bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard. And of the plastic, that means bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. So let's review. Things that can go into a recycling bin include a glass bottle, aluminum and steel cans, plastic bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, paper, and cardboard. Things that cannot go in a recycling bin include glass dishware, scrap metal, clamshells, chip bags, plastic bags, as well as grease-soaked pizza boxes, or anything with liquids or food residue still in them. A few common tips for how to recycle properly also include contacting your local facility. In the Front Range, which is where I live in Denver, we do not want your plastic bags. They don't want my plastic bags. They don't want your plastic bags. But you know who does want your plastic bags is your local King Soopers grocery store, or sometimes your Best Buy. Those are specific places that do accept plastic bags, and you'll usually see a large container that full of them. Same with electronics. Another tip is you do want to flatten the cardboard. I know it's kind of a hassle, but we're already opening the box halfway, right? Go ahead, take your scissors, cut the bottom tape off too, and just flatten the box. It really helps with space, and it helps with the sorting systems, the automated sorting systems that people have in place. A third tip, and this is something I didn't know, is don't crush the aluminum cans. I did not know this. We are not supposed to crush the cans. Apparently that's an antiquated way of recycling. Again, it comes back to the sorting technology that people have within the recycling facilities. The technology is always upgrading, and maybe back in the day that used to be a good thing to help them sort it out, but not anymore. So don't crush cans, do crush your cardboard. That's for the Front Range recycling systems. Again, goes back to tip number 1, contact your local facility. Number 4, really small things like bottle caps will only get recycled if you keep them on the whole bottle. In addition, for tips of things that can and cannot be recycled, we have some tips of how long it takes to recycle things. Glass, aluminum, and steel are infinitely recyclable. They can always be turned into a new product. Paper and cardboard can be turned into something new about 5 to 7 times before the fibers begin to get too small and they break down, and then at that point you just need to compost it. Lastly, plastics can only be recycled 1 to 2 times. So I went to the grocery store today and I picked up a clamshell container, a plastic clamshell container of berries. So I am going to have to boycott berries, but I specifically bought this container to talk about on the podcast today, because usually it's just that clear plastic, but I was at Whole Foods and they had the green plastic container. And I was like, what is this? And it turns out it is a plastic made of recycled plastic bottles. So that container is actually only going to be able to be recycled that one time, or maybe another time. I'm still going to put it in the recycling bin, but I didn't see a recycling symbol on it. However, in just a bit in the podcast, we are going to discuss those recycling symbols and why they're actually very misleading, as we mentioned above, saying that the number 1 for a clamshell container isn't the same as a number 1 for a plastic bottle. So it's always better to use glass, aluminum, and steel when you can. This brings us to the point of the popularity for aluminum straws, those reusable utensil kits, which is really just a utensil anyways, but they're really cutely packaged, just like a fork, spoon, a knife, a straw, and a straw cleaner, and maybe even some chopsticks if you buy a really fancy one, of aluminum silverware. And then it's in like a little zipper or a little pouch with a little napkin that you can clean it off. So those are always really good to travel around with, so you don't have to keep using single-use plastic forks that are just going to stab sea turtles in the nose. Okay? This is a message for myself too, people. I am absolutely not perfect. There's always times when I'm like moving and I just have to give up in that moment in time. I really do, but I need to be better about it. So I'm also doing this recycling episode for myself. So just remember, we can always all be better. All right, back to the script that I have written out. So we have all this fuss about recycling when they can really only become something new maybe once or twice. These materials that can be recycled are so because they have good end markets. The quote, true recyclables are glass, aluminum, steel because they have a closed loop system where they are turned from, let's say, a can into another can, or a can into a mold for a pie crust. That's a closed loop system. What goes in comes out into something new. That other thing goes back in, and it's infinite, okay? Dead end recyclables are the products that get turned into one product, like a carpet or a picture frame or that green berry container. They're just dead end. You can't reuse them after that. Carpets just end up in the trash. And if anyone knows anything about commercial or construction recycling, please reach out to me. So it's not truly recycled until the material is turned into a new product. And we need end markets to help create robust closed loop systems. So this whole thing about end markets, we need end markets, is because China is no longer the world's end market for recyclables. And in order to make this a viable system, we need end markets that help money, that help the cost. They keep the costs down so we don't have to ship it all the way around the world. We don't have to drive it halfway across the country. And in some cases, rural areas it is currently more expensive for them to recycle because they have a waste collection site that's a lot closer than a recyclables facility, which they have to drive a lot further to, which is gas, it's labor, it's all of that. So these are things that we really have to think about in order to make recycling a legitimate business. Currently in the Denver metro area, there is a closed loop system for glass. Momentum Recycling in Broomfield sorts amber, clear, and green glass, and then sells it to bottling manufacturers in Wheat Ridge, who then melts the glass and turns it into new beer bottles. So that's a really fast process because it only takes 30 days for glass to become something new, and aluminum takes 60 days to become something new. And those are two of the infinitely recyclable products. There's also a company, Trex, Trex.com, that will take plastic bags from grocery stores where we are supposed to drop them off and make them into decks or docks, which is really awesome because then they're going to last a lot longer. They're not going to have weather erosion. Like, plastic is a really durable material, and to turn it into something like a deck or a dock that's going to have a lot of weather damage, sun exposure, is just so smart because then it helps your home last longer. And as a real estate agent, I would love to talk with you more about implementing that into your house. And so the last thing I want to cover today is the uncommonly known mix-up between the recycling symbol and the label that's on the bottom of goods. In the 1970s, plastic companies lobbied to take the recycling symbol, which is the 3 tracing arrows, and insert a number in the middle. Quick side note. I could be entirely wrong, but this seems like a really poor job on the part of whatever nonprofit, I'm assuming, created the recycling symbol, because did they not trademark it? And how was the plastic companies able to lobby to take that recycling symbol? I guess they had better lawyers. I don't know. But if you're an activist or an environmentalist who lacks business knowledge, please look up the Green Team Academy by Joan Gregerson. She's been a podcast guest of mine before, and she is just really smart. Her claim to fame is that she's made a lot of mistakes before and she doesn't want other people to keep making those. So if you need some business savvy knowledge and you're very well versed in activism or environmentalism, look up Green Team Academy. So as you can obviously guess, the plastic companies won this lobbying fight because we now see on the bottom of every piece of plastic out there what we as consumers assume to be the recycling symbol. But it has a number in the middle. And we think that number is telling us and recycling facilities what group of plastic this is a part of so they can then turn it into something new. And this is just a very misleading symbol. Billions of dollars have gone into advertising and branding to lead consumers to not only believe that all plastics are recyclable, but that it's the consumer's responsibility to choose recyclable products and then put them in our little blue or green bins. But this is just inefficient and it's not true. Because as we have covered, clamshells, for example, this is a fantastic example. The clamshells have that recycling symbol with a number on the bottom. And we think, oh, I can buy this container of blueberries because I can recycle this plastic. But we can't. We cannot. It's false advertisement. It's just bad. So it's really misleading, and it's not entirely our responsibility, but it is our responsibility at this point to say, okay, I know that there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's 2021. We all know the world is full of misinformation. So it's our job to think and pause and say, okay, what is recyclable? What isn't? I need to look into this further. And I think to do that, we go back to our tip number 1, call your local facility. Just call whoever picks up your recycling or whatever community bin that you bring it to and ask them, hey, like, do you take this? Do you take that? And then we can think about that when we shop. Because let me ask you something. How many products have you bought that say 100% recycled plastic? I bought the green berry container today. That's the only thing that I think I've ever purchased that says 100% recycled plastic. I know there's all these, I used to be a bottle socks and things like that. So there are a few out there, right? But picture yourself in your local grocery store. How many products do you see that actually advertise that? If we were really advertising like, these are all recycled products, it would have a huge like banner overhead that says recycled section, which maybe is soon to come. Please direct message me on Instagram, and I would love to do a segment with your local store owners. If you shop at a zero waste store or you shop at a grocery store that has like a fully recycled section on that, I would absolutely love to do a segment on that, because we're not getting that back. I am not receiving back what I thought was going into the recycling bin. So what are the recycled materials? What are these freaking materials that are being recycled? Where are they? And why don't they state it so? Are all the cans that we buy, did they say 100% reused aluminum? Maybe I just haven't been paying attention, but hit me up. We can start a conversation about that. And in conclusion, that's all that I have for today, y'all. I was going to write out a conclusion statement, but I don't have one. So let me just think on the fly. Thank you guys so much for listening. Yeah, let's think about what products out there actually are 100% recycled. Let's, instead of, and I'm talking to myself here, when I want to buy a reusable water bottle, something that I can fill up all the time, I currently have a big plastic one. I mean, it's going to last me for freaking ever. I certainly wouldn't buy one in glass. I've tried that before. It's just going to break in a really bad moment. So if you're out there and you're using glass to drink out of, more power to you. But I'm going to stick with either that big plastic one that I have over glass that I know is going to last me forever, or I need to look into buying like an aluminum one, which is kind of heavy and inefficient. But I actually did see a really cool company on Instagram the other day, and I think they're called Modal, and they have it's like a squishy plastic collapsible reusable water bottle. So I'm just gonna not get into all that right now because I need to look them up. But thanks for taking a listen to this podcast today. Hopefully you learned something about recycling. I definitely learned a lot, and that's why I wanted to do this episode, was because I needed to learn about what the heck is happening in the world of recycling. That's the same reason that I went into the recycling community center with Chris in Monroe, Louisiana, was because it was just open and I could see all of this stuff sitting there, and I didn't know actually what happened with it, and I've seen some driving on the interstate before. You can see these giant plants, these dump trucks just scooping heaps of, well, honestly just looks like trash, but I guess it's recyclables, into this large warehouse, and where it's either going to have to be recycled by hand. These are the two ways that they do it, or a sorting machine. And so I did hear on the film Plastic Wars that I listened to and referred throughout this podcast that them coming up with new sorting technology is also one of sort of those misleading things, that when they say, oh, we have new technology to help the sorting process go faster. I mean, it's a really fast sorting process. I think, I'm not misquoting it, they can do 10,000 items in like 30 seconds. So that's really fast. So the technology is innovating and speeding up the recycling process, but we're still continuing to produce plastic. We're still the #1 country for plastic production in the world. So let's be mindful consumers. Let's take a look at the companies who are creating all these items. Let's demand that they change their ways by what we purchase as a consumer, but let's also take a step further. Join a group that works to lobby to create new systems in place that make things more energy efficient, that make things more healthy for the world around us. And that's really what this whole podcast is about, is living more sustainably within our own home environment. So I'm out. Podcast listeners, as always, thanks for being a guest in my eco-friendly home today. I really hope you learned something new, and I hope you find a way to implement this into your life so you too can create your eco-friendly home. As always, I'm available to direct message on Instagram at Moving with Madison. And besides my podcast, I provide services as a real estate change agent in the Denver metro area, specializing in helping you buy, sell, or create your eco-friendly home. Something that this podcast is helping me get better at each and every day. When you come back over, please bring those cookies again. They were really good, and I'll see y'all next time.